The sound of machinery grinding to a halt was what made Owen Kincaid look up from loading his wagon with fresh-cut lumber, and what he saw in the doorway of the sawmill made his breath catch in his throat. A young woman swaying on her feet, her face pale as death, before she crumpled to the dusty floor like a rag doll. Owen dropped the plank he was holding and covered the distance between them in 4 long strides, his muscular frame moving with surprising speed for a man who stood well over 6 feet tall. He knelt beside her, his calloused hands surprisingly gentle as he turned her onto her back. She was breathing, thank God, but her face was gaunt, her cheekbones sharp beneath skin that looked almost translucent in the harsh Montana sunlight streaming through the mill's open doors. Her dress, once a decent calico print, hung on her thin frame like it had been made for someone twice her size. It was July of 1877, and butt was growing fast with the copper mining boom, but not everyone was prospering from it. "Someone get water," Owen barked at the mill workers who had gathered around, their faces curious but unhelpful. He carefully gathered the unconscious woman into his arms, feeling how light she was, how her bones seemed too close to the surface. His jaw clenched with anger that had nowhere to go. How long had she been starving? A worker rushed over with a tin cup of water, and Owen supported her head, trickling a small amount between her pale lips. She stirred, her eyelids fluttering, and then suddenly her eyes opened wide. They were the color of spring grass, green and vibrant, the only thing about her that seemed alive. Those eyes filled with panic as she realized she was being held by a stranger, and she struggled weakly against his grip. "Easy now," Owen said, his voice a low rumble that he tried to make soothing. "You fainted. Just lie still a moment." "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice hoarse and thin. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I was just looking for work and I got dizzy." "When did you last eat?" Owen asked bluntly. Her eyes slid away from his, shame coloring what little remained of her complexion. "I had some water this morning. That's not what I asked." She was silent for a long moment before answering. "3 days ago, a woman at the boarding house gave me some bread crusts." The anger that had been simmering in Owen's chest flared hot. 3 days. This slip of a girl had gone 3 days without food, and she was out looking for work instead of collapsed in a bed somewhere. He made a decision in that instant that would change both their lives, though he did not yet know it. "Can you stand?" he asked. She nodded, pride straightening her spine despite her obvious weakness. Owen helped her to her feet, keeping one large hand under her elbow to steady her. She was tiny compared to him, the top of her head barely reaching his shoulder. His long, dark hair was tied back with a leather cord to keep it out of his face while he worked, and he was covered in sawdust and sweat from loading lumber all morning, but he did not care about his appearance. All he cared about was getting food into this woman before she fainted again. "What's your name?" he asked as he guided her toward his wagon. "Grace Whitmore," she said softly. "And I really am all right. I just need to rest a moment and then I'll be on my way." "You'll be on your way to my cabin," Owen said firmly, "after you've had a proper meal and some rest." "My name's Owen Kincaid, and I live up in the mountains about 5 miles from here. I've got food and a spare bed, and you're going to use both." Grace stopped walking, pulling against his gentle grip. "I can't do that. I don't know you and it wouldn't be proper." Owen turned to face her fully, and she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. They were the color of storm clouds, gray and serious. His face was all hard angles and dark stubble, his shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. He was not handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about him, something that made Grace feel both nervous and safe at the same time. "You've got 2 choices, Miss Whitmore," Owen said, his voice gentle despite the firmness of his words. You can come with me and get fed and rested, or you can stay here in town and faint again, maybe somewhere where there's no one around to catch you. Maybe you'll hit your head on something hard next time. Maybe you won't wake up. Is your propriety worth dying for?" Grace wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. She had nowhere to go, no money for food, and no prospects for work. She had come to Butt from Boston 3 months ago, following a man who had promised to marry her, only to discover when she arrived that he was already married with 3 children. She had been too ashamed to write to her family back east and admit her foolishness, too proud to beg for train fare home. She had tried to find work, but jobs for respectable women were scarce, and she had no skills that translated to frontier life. Her savings had run out weeks ago, and she had been slowly starving, too stubborn to admit defeat. "All right," she whispered, and the relief in Owen's eyes surprised her. He helped her up onto the wagon seat, then climbed up beside her. His presence was overwhelming, all solid muscle and quiet confidence. The wagon dipped under his weight as he settled onto the bench, and Grace found herself sliding slightly toward him before she caught herself. He clicked his tongue at the 2 sturdy horses, and they started moving, pulling away from the sawmill and toward the mountains that rose like sentinels to the west of town. They rode in silence for a while, the wagon bouncing over the rough road. Grace tried not to think about how improper this was, riding off alone with a strange man to his isolated cabin. But her survival instinct was stronger than her sense of propriety, and something about Owen Kincaid made her trust him. Maybe it was the way he had been so careful with her when she was unconscious. Maybe it was the genuine concern in his eyes, or maybe she was just too tired and hungry to care anymore. "How long have you been in Butt?" Owen asked, breaking the silence. 3 months, Grace said. "I came from Boston." "That's a long way to travel. You got family here." "No." She did not elaborate, and Owen did not push. He was a man who understood the value of privacy. "Well, you've got food and shelter now, at least for tonight," Owen said. "We can figure out the rest later." The road climbed steadily as they left Butt behind, winding through pine forests and across clear streams. The air grew cooler and fresher, and despite her exhaustion, Grace felt something in her chest loosen. She had not realized how oppressive the town had become, with its noise and smoke and crowds of rough miners. Up here, with the wind sighing through the pines and birds calling from the trees, she could breathe. Owen's cabin appeared after about an hour of travel, nestled in a clearing with a view of the valley below. It was larger than Grace had expected, built of solid logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. There was a barn nearby, and she could see chickens scratching in a fenced yard. A vegetable garden grew on the sunny side of the cabin, neat rows of green plants that spoke of careful tending. "You live here alone?" Grace asked as Owen helped her down from the wagon. "Just me," Owen confirmed. "I prefer the quiet. I come down to town when I need supplies or when the mill needs lumber, but mostly I keep to myself up here." He guided her to the porch and opened the cabin door, ushering her inside. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, but as Grace's eyes adjusted, she was surprised by what she saw. The cabin was clean and well organized, with a large fireplace dominating one wall, a sturdy table and chairs, shelves lined with supplies, and a bed in the far corner. Another door led to what looked like a second room. It was a bachelor's space, but it was not the dirty, chaotic mess she might have expected. "Sit," Owen said, pointing to one of the chairs at the table. Grace sat gratefully, her legs trembling from the effort of standing. Owen moved around the cabin with practiced efficiency, building up the fire in the hearth, filling a pot with water from a bucket, and pulling out supplies from his shelves. Grace watched, feeling useless and embarrassed. "Is there something I can do to help?" she asked. You can sit there and rest, Owen said firmly. That's all the help I need from you right now. He cut thick slices from a loaf of bread, laid strips of bacon in a pan, and cracked eggs into a bowl. The smell of cooking food made Grace's stomach clench painfully, and she pressed a hand to her middle, trying to will away the gnawing hunger. Owen glanced at her and his expression softened. Won't be long now, he said. He was true to his word. Within 15 minutes, he set a plate in front of her piled high with bacon, scrambled eggs, and buttered bread. There was also a cup of milk, rich and creamy, probably from a cow she had not yet seen. Grace stared at the food, her eyes suddenly burning with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "Eat slowly," Owen cautioned. "Your stomach's not used to it. Little bites, take your time." Grace nodded and picked up her fork with a shaking hand. The first bite of egg was the most delicious thing she had ever tasted, and she had to restrain herself from shoveling the food into her mouth as fast as she could. She followed Owen's advice, eating slowly, and he sat across from her with his own plate, eating in companionable silence. When she had finished about half the food on her plate, Grace's stomach began to protest, and she reluctantly set down her fork. "I'm sorry, I can't eat any more right now." "That's all right," Owen said. "You can have more later. Why don't you lie down for a bit? You look exhausted." He was right. Now that she had food in her belly, the exhaustion was overwhelming. She could barely keep her eyes open. Owen led her to the second room, which contained another bed, a dresser, and a trunk. The bed was neatly made with clean quilts. "This was meant to be a guest room, but I have not had much use for it," Owen said. "It's yours for as long as you need it." "I can't impose on you like this," Grace protested weakly. "I should go back to town." "And do what? Starve in the street?" Owen's voice was sharp, but his eyes were kind. "Look, Miss Whitmore, I don't know your story and I won't pry. But you need help and I'm offering it. No strings attached. You rest up, get your strength back, and then we'll figure out what comes next. All right." Grace looked up at this large, gruff mountain man who had appeared in her life like some kind of miracle, and she felt her resistance crumble. "All right," she whispered. "Thank you, Mr. Kincaid." "Owen," he corrected. "Out here we do not stand much on formality." "Then you should call me Grace." He smiled for the first time, a quick flash of warmth that transformed his serious face. "Grace it is. Now get some sleep." She did not even remember lying down. The moment her head touched the pillow, she was unconscious, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep that lasted the rest of the day and all through the night. When Grace woke, sunshine was streaming through the window, and she could hear the sound of an axe striking wood outside. She sat up slowly, disoriented for a moment before memory returned. She was in Owen Kincaid's cabin in the mountains. He had fed her and given her a bed. She looked down at herself and realized she was still wearing her dusty, worn dress. She must have looked terrible. There was a basin of water on the dresser and a clean cloth beside it. Grace washed her face and hands, trying to make herself presentable, then ventured out into the main room. The cabin was empty, but there was fresh bread on the table and a jar of what looked like jam. Her stomach growled and she cut herself a slice, spreading it with the jam. It was huckleberry, sweet and tart, and absolutely delicious. The sound of the axe had stopped, and a moment later Owen appeared in the doorway. He was shirtless, his muscular torso gleaming with sweat, and Grace felt her face heat as she quickly looked away. She heard him chuckle softly. "Sorry, I'll put a shirt on," he said, and disappeared back outside. When he returned a moment later, he was decently covered, though the shirt clung to his damp skin. "How are you feeling?" "Much better," Grace said honestly. "I slept so long. What time is it?" "About 10 in the morning. You slept near 15 hours." Owen poured himself some water from a pitcher and drank deeply. Your body needed it. I should help with chores, Grace said. I can't just sit here and let you wait on me. Owen studied her for a moment, then nodded. If you feel up to it, there's plenty to do, but take it easy. You are not fully recovered yet. Over the next few days, they fell into a rhythm. Grace helped with cooking and cleaning, tended the vegetable garden, and gathered eggs from the chickens. Owen chopped wood, hunted game, and worked on various projects around the cabin. He treated her with unfailing courtesy, never pushing into her personal space, never asking prying questions about her past. But Grace found herself wanting to talk to him, drawn by his quiet strength and the unexpected gentleness beneath his rough exterior. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Grace found herself telling him about Boston, about her family, about the man who had lied to her and left her stranded in Montana. Owen listened without interrupting, his face growing darker as she described how she had been deceived. He should be horsewhipped, Owen said when she finished. What kind of man does that to a woman? A dishonest one, Grace said with a bitter laugh. I was so foolish. I believed everything he told me. That does not make you foolish, Owen said firmly. That makes you trusting. He's the one who should be ashamed, not you. Grace felt tears prick her eyes at his words. No one had said that to her before. She had spent the past 3 months drowning in shame and self-recrimination, convinced that her suffering was her own fault for being so naive. But Owen was right. She had not done anything wrong. She had simply trusted someone who did not deserve it. Thank you, she said softly, for saying that. And for everything else. You saved my life, Owen. He looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. No, they would not have. People walked past me in that town every day, saw me getting thinner and more desperate, and no one offered to help. You're a good man. Owen did not respond, but she saw his jaw tighten, saw the way his hands gripped the arms of his chair. They sat in silence as the sky turned from gold to purple to deep blue, and Grace felt something shift between them, something warm and tentative and full of possibility. As the weeks passed, Grace grew stronger. Her face filled out, color returned to her cheeks, and she no longer felt like she might collapse at any moment. She learned the rhythms of mountain life, the way the weather could change in an instant, the sounds of different animals in the forest, the satisfaction of growing your own food and making your own way. She also learned about Owen, slowly piecing together his story from the small details he let slip. He had been a trapper before settling here, had traveled all over the Rocky Mountains, and had seen things most people only read about in books. He had built this cabin with his own hands 5 years ago, carving out a life of solitude after years of wandering. He was 32 years old, had never been married, and seemed content with his isolation. Or at least, he had been content before Grace arrived. Now, Grace noticed, he seemed lighter somehow. He smiled more often, laughed at her jokes, and sought out her company in small ways. He would bring her wildflowers from his hunting trips, or save the best pieces of meat for her plate, or sit with her in the evenings and tell her stories of his travels. And Grace found herself falling for him, slowly and inevitably, like a leaf drifting down a stream. She loved the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way his large hands could be so gentle with injured animals or delicate plants. She loved his quiet competence, the way he could fix anything and solve any problem with patient determination. She loved the sound of his voice, deep and rumbling, and the way he said her name like it meant something. But she did not know if he felt the same way, and she was too afraid to ask. It was mid-August when things came to a head. Grace was in the garden harvesting carrots when she heard Owen call her name urgently. She dropped the basket and ran toward his voice, her heart pounding. She found him at the edge of the clearing, kneeling beside a small deer that had clearly been injured, its leg caught in what looked like an old trap. "Can you hold her steady while I get this off?" Owen asked, his hands already working at the rusted metal. Grace knelt and gently held the deer's head, murmuring soothing nonsense while Owen carefully pried open the trap. The deer struggled weakly, its eyes rolling with fear, but Grace kept her voice calm and her touch gentle. Finally, the trap came free and Owen quickly examined the injured leg. "It's not broken, just bruised," he said. "She'll heal up fine if we can keep her calm for a bit." They carried the deer to the barn, making a bed of soft hay in one of the empty stalls. Grace sat with the animal while Owen prepared a poultice for the injured leg, and gradually the deer calmed, its rapid breathing slowing. When Owen returned with the medicine, he knelt beside Grace, their shoulders touching as they worked together to bandage the leg. "You're good at this," Owen said quietly. "You have a gentle touch." Grace felt her face warm. "I used to help my father with his horses when I was young, before I moved to the city. You miss it, the country life." "I did not think I did," Grace admitted. "I thought I wanted the excitement of the city, the society, the culture. But being here, I realize I was wrong. This feels more like home than Boston ever did." Owen turned to look at her, and something in his expression made Grace's breath catch. They were so close, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken words and feelings. "Grace," Owen said, his voice rough, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" He hesitated, then seemed to force the words out. "I have not been honest with you. Well, not dishonest exactly, but I have not told you everything. The reason I brought you here, the reason I have been letting you stay, it is not just charity. I mean, it started that way, but now—" He trailed off, looking frustrated. "Now what?" Grace prompted gently. "Now I do not want you to leave," Owen said bluntly. "I know I should. I know you probably want to go back to civilization, find proper work, make a real life for yourself. But the thought of you leaving, of this cabin being empty again, of eating meals alone and having no one to talk to in the evenings, I cannot stand it. And that is selfish of me, I know, but there it is." Grace's heart was hammering so hard she thought Owen must be able to hear it. "What are you saying?" Owen reached out and took her hand, his large palm engulfing her smaller one. "I am saying that I have feelings for you, Grace, deep feelings. I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you lying on that mill floor, looking so fragile and so fierce at the same time. And every day since then, watching you get stronger, watching you laugh and work and make this place feel like a home instead of just a cabin, I have fallen harder. I know I have got no right to feel this way. I am just a rough mountain man with nothing much to offer, but I had to tell you. I could not let you leave without you knowing." Grace felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but they were happy tears, tears of relief and joy. "Owen, you foolish man, do you really not know?" "Know what?" "That I have fallen for you too. That I have been trying to hide it, because I thought you could never feel that way about me. That I have been dreading the day when you would tell me it was time to go back to town, because I cannot imagine leaving you." Owen stared at her for a long moment, as if he could not quite believe what he was hearing. Then, slowly, carefully, he reached up and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing away her tears. "You mean that?" "Every word," Grace whispered. He kissed her then, soft and tentative at first, then deeper as she responded, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck. He pulled her close, and Grace melted into his embrace, feeling safe and wanted and loved for the first time in longer than she could remember. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing hard, and Owen was smiling that rare, transformative smile that made Grace's heart flip. "So you will stay?" he asked. "Not just for now, but for good." "For good," Grace confirmed. "If you will have me." "Have you?" "Grace, I will marry you tomorrow if you will let me. I will spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you never go hungry again, never feel alone or unwanted again. I will build you anything you need, give you anything you want, and love you with everything I have, if you will have me." Grace laughed through her tears. "Yes, Owen, yes to all of it. Yes." They married in but 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church with the minister and 2 witnesses pulled from the street. Grace wore a new dress that Owen had bought for her, pale blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes, and Owen wore his best shirt and pants, his long hair neatly tied back. They spoke their vows in front of God and man, promising to love and cherish each other for the rest of their days. And when Owen kissed his bride, Grace knew she had finally found where she belonged. The first months of married life were an adjustment, learning to share space and make decisions together, learning each other's habits and preferences. But it was also wonderful. Grace had never felt so cherished, so protected, so loved. Owen was attentive and affectionate, quick to help with any task and quicker still to praise her efforts. He made her laugh with his dry humor and feel safe with his quiet strength. And at night, in their shared bed, he loved her with a passion and tenderness that took her breath away. Grace transformed the cabin into a true home, adding curtains to the windows, braiding rugs for the floors, and filling the shelves with preserves and dried herbs. She planted flowers around the porch and taught Owen how to bake proper bread. Owen, for his part, built Grace a larger henhouse, expanded the garden, and even constructed a small workshop where she could pursue the leatherworking hobby she had mentioned enjoying as a girl. They worked side by side, partners in every sense of the word, and their love deepened with every passing day. Grace had never imagined she could be this happy, that life could feel this full and rich and meaningful. And Owen, who had spent years alone and convinced himself he preferred it, discovered the joy of companionship, of having someone to share the burdens and celebrate the victories, of being loved exactly as he was. When winter came, they were snowed in for weeks at a time, but they did not mind. They had plenty of supplies, a warm fire, and each other. They spent the long evenings reading aloud, playing cards, and making plans for the spring. Owen taught Grace to shoot, patiently coaching her until she could hit a target with reasonable accuracy. Grace taught Owen to play the piano on an old upright he surprised her with one day, hauling it up the mountain in a borrowed wagon as an early Christmas present. It was during one of those snowy evenings in January of 1878, as they sat by the fire with Grace's head resting on Owen's shoulder, that she told him her news. "Owen, I am with child." He went very still, and for a moment Grace worried. Then he turned to her, his eyes shining with tears, and pulled her into his arms. "Truly, truly. I am about 2 months along, I think. The baby should come in late summer." Owen buried his face in her hair, and Grace felt his shoulders shake. She held him, understanding that these were tears of joy, of overwhelming emotion that he did not quite know how to express in words. When he finally pulled back, his face was wet but smiling. "I am going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a family." "We are," Grace confirmed. "Are you happy?" "Happy, Grace, I am beyond happy. I am terrified and thrilled and grateful all at once. I never thought I would have this. A wife, a child, a real family. It is more than I ever dreamed of." He kissed her then, tender and sweet, and Grace knew that their child would be raised in a home full of love, in the wild beauty of the Montana mountains, with parents who adored each other and would do anything to protect their family. The pregnancy was not always easy. Grace suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and as she grew larger, the mountain heat of summer became oppressive. But Owen was devoted, bringing her cool water from the stream, fanning her when she was hot, rubbing her swollen feet in the evenings. He read to her from the collection of books they had accumulated, and when she could not sleep, he would sit up with her and talk about their future, about the child they would soon meet. In late August, as the evenings began to cool and the aspen leaves started to turn gold, Grace went into labor. Owen had arranged for a midwife from Butte to stay with them for the last few weeks of the pregnancy, a capable older woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had delivered dozens of babies. She took charge when the contractions began, banishing Owen from the bedroom despite his protests. "You will just be in the way," Mrs. Henderson said firmly. "Go chop wood or pace or do whatever it is men do, but let me work." Owen spent the longest day of his life pacing the cabin, chopping enough wood to last 3 winters, and praying to any god who would listen to keep Grace safe. The sounds coming from the bedroom terrified him, Grace's cries of pain making him want to burst through the door and fix things somehow. But he knew he was powerless, that all he could do was wait and trust Mrs. Henderson. As the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, a new sound joined the symphony from the bedroom, the strong, lusty cry of a newborn baby. Owen froze, hardly daring to breathe, until Mrs. Henderson opened the door and smiled at him. "You have a son, Mr. Kincaid. A healthy, strong boy, and your wife is tired but well." Owen barely heard the last part. He rushed into the room and found Grace propped up in bed, exhausted and pale but smiling, holding a small bundle in her arms. She looked up as he approached, and the love in her eyes took his breath away. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Owen sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was waving one small fist in the air, his eyes scrunched shut. He was perfect, absolutely perfect. "He is beautiful," Owen whispered, "just like his mother. He has your nose," Grace said with a tired laugh. "Poor child. I love your nose." Grace shifted the baby slightly. "Do you want to hold him?" Owen took his son with shaking hands, terrified he might drop him or hold him wrong, but the moment the baby settled against his chest, something clicked into place. This was his son, his family, the culmination of everything he had never known he wanted. "What should we name him?" Grace asked. They had discussed names but had not settled on anything definite. Owen looked down at the small face, thinking, "What about Thomas? It was my father's name." "Thomas Kincaid," Grace said, testing it out. "I like it. Thomas Owen Kincaid." "Thomas Owen Kincaid," Owen repeated, and the baby made a small noise, almost as if in approval. The first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong, but he still needed constant care. Owen and Grace took turns walking him when he cried at night, changing his diapers and marveling at every small milestone. Owen discovered a tenderness in himself he had not known existed, and Grace fell even more in love with her husband as she watched him cradle their son, singing off key lullabies and making silly faces to elicit a smile. As Thomas grew, the cabin filled with the sounds of childhood gurgles and coos, then babbles, and eventually his first words. Owen built him a cradle that rocked beside their bed, then a small bed for when he was bigger. Grace sewed him tiny clothes and knitted blankets. They were a family in every sense of the word, bound by love and commitment and the daily work of caring for each other. When Thomas was 2 years old, Grace discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and in the spring of 1881 she gave birth to a daughter. They named her Mary, after Grace's mother, and she had her mother's green eyes and delicate features. Thomas was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her, and Owen joked that they would need to build an addition to the cabin soon. He did exactly that the following summer, adding 2 new bedrooms and expanding the main living space. The cabin that had once housed a solitary mountain man now echoed with the laughter of children, with Grace's singing as she worked, with the full, rich sounds of a happy family. Life was not always easy. There were harsh winters when supplies ran low, summers when the garden suffered from drought, and the constant challenges of frontier life. But Owen and Grace faced everything together, their love growing stronger with each obstacle they overcame. Owen continued to provide lumber to the mill and hunt game for their table, and Grace sold her leatherwork in town, gaining a reputation for fine craftsmanship. They were respected in Butte, known as hardworking, honest people who helped their neighbors and raised their children well. As the years passed, the children grew. Thomas became a sturdy boy who loved the outdoors and followed his father everywhere, learning to hunt and trap and work with wood. Mary was quieter, more inclined to stay inside with her mother, learning to cook and sew and tend the garden. Both children were bright and curious, and Grace taught them to read and write, using the books she and Owen had collected over the years. In the summer of 1885, when Thomas was 7 and Mary was 4, Grace gave birth again, this time to twin boys. Owen was beside himself, terrified at the prospect of 2 babies at once, but Mrs. Henderson assured him that twins often ran in families and were nothing to fear. The boys were born healthy and strong, identical in every way except for a small birthmark one had on his shoulder. They named them James and John, and the cabin became even more crowded and chaotic and full of love. Owen added yet another room, and Grace often laughed that their mountain cabin was becoming a mansion. But she would not have changed a thing. She had 4 beautiful children, a husband who loved her beyond measure, and a life filled with purpose and meaning. The frightened, starving girl who had fainted in the sawmill felt like someone from another lifetime, a distant memory of a person she used to be. One evening, when the twins were about 6 months old and the older children were finally asleep after much coaxing, Owen and Grace sat on the porch watching the stars. It was a warm night, the air heavy with the scent of pine and wildflowers, and Grace leaned against her husband's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "Taking me in that day. Your quiet life has certainly gotten a lot noisier." Owen wrapped his arm around her and pulled her close. "Regret it? Grace, that was the best decision I ever made. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions, telling myself I was content. But I did not know what real contentment was until I had you, until we built this life together. I would not trade a single noisy, chaotic moment of it for all the quiet in the world." Grace tilted her head up and kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. "I love you, Owen Kincaid. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." "And you saved me right back," Owen murmured against her lips. "We saved each other." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the forest, until a cry from inside announced that one of the twins was awake and hungry. Grace sighed and started to get up, but Owen stopped her. "I will get him," he said. "You rest." He disappeared inside, and Grace heard him talking softly to the baby, his deep voice soothing. A moment later he reappeared with James, or maybe it was John. She still had trouble telling them apart in the dark. Owen sat back down with the baby cradled in his massive arms, and Grace settled the baby to nurse while Owen kept his arm around her. This was her life now. This messy, beautiful, exhausting, wonderful life. And she had never been happier. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. The children grew like weeds, Thomas shooting up until he was nearly as tall as his father by the time he was 15. He had inherited Owen's build, all broad shoulders and solid muscle, and his quiet, competent nature. Mary bloomed into a lovely young woman, gentle and kind, with a talent for healing that led her to apprentice with the town doctor. The twins were inseparable, partners in mischief and adventure, keeping Grace on her toes. In 1893, when Thomas was 16 and already helping his father with the logging business, Grace and Owen celebrated their 15th wedding anniversary. The children had planned a surprise party, decorating the cabin with wildflowers and ribbons, and cooking a feast with Mrs. Henderson's help. As Grace looked around the table at her family, all of them laughing and talking and teasing each other, she felt her heart might burst with happiness. After dinner, Owen took her hand and led her outside to the porch where they had shared so many important moments. The September evening was cool and clear, the first hints of autumn in the air. "I have something for you," Owen said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Grace opened it to find a delicate gold locket. Inside were tiny photographs of each of their children, painstakingly arranged. "Owen, it is beautiful," Grace breathed. "How did you manage this?" "I had help," Owen admitted. "Thomas went to town with me to find the locket, and Mary helped me get the photographs sized right. It was a family effort." Grace put the locket on, feeling the weight of it against her heart. "I love it, and I love you. These 15 years have been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," Owen said. "Though if I am being honest, they have also been the most terrifying, the most exhausting, and the most expensive." Grace laughed. "4 children will do that." "Worth every moment of terror, every sleepless night, and every penny," Owen said seriously. "I would do it all again in a heartbeat." He pulled her into his arms, and they danced slowly on the porch to music only they could hear, just as they had done on their wedding night. Grace rested her head against Owen's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, and knew that she had found her home. Not just the cabin in the mountains, but here, in Owen's arms, surrounded by the family they had created together. As the years turned into decades, life continued to unfold in all its messy glory. Thomas married a sweet girl from town named Elizabeth, and they built their own cabin not far from Owen and Grace, staying close to the family. He took over more and more of the logging business as Owen aged, though Owen insisted he was not ready to retire completely. Mary married the doctor she had apprenticed with, a widower named Robert who was kind and patient and perfectly suited to her gentle nature. They set up practice in Butt, and Grace visited often, proud of the work her daughter was doing. The twins were slower to settle down, spending their late teens and early 20s traveling and seeking adventure, but eventually they too returned to Montana. James became a rancher, buying land in the valley and raising cattle. John surprised everyone by opening a general store in Butt, discovering he had a head for business and a talent for making people laugh. As each child married and started families of their own, the cabin in the mountains became the center of a growing clan. Sunday dinners were loud, chaotic affairs with grandchildren running everywhere and multiple conversations happening at once. Owen built a long table to accommodate everyone, and Grace cooked for what felt like an army. But she loved it, loved seeing her children happy and settled, loved the sound of grandchildren's laughter echoing through the trees. In the summer of 1910, Owen and Grace celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary and their golden years together. Owen was 64, his dark hair now streaked with silver, but he was still strong, still chopping his own wood and hunting his own game. Grace was 52, her face lined with laugh lines and her hair more gray than brown, but her green eyes still sparkled with the same vitality they had when she was young. They sat on the porch, as they had countless times before, watching the sun set over the mountains. Their children were all grown, their grandchildren healthy and happy. The cabin they had built together stood strong against the elements, a testament to their commitment and hard work. "You remember the day we met?" Grace asked, her hand finding Owen's as naturally as breathing. "Every detail," Owen said. "You were lying on that floor, looking like you might disappear entirely if someone breathed on you too hard. I was terrified I was going to lose you before I even knew you. And instead you fed me," Grace said with a smile, "and made sure I never starved again. You kept your promise, Owen. You have spent all these years taking care of me, providing for me, making sure I had everything I needed." "It was not a hardship," Owen said gruffly. "It was my privilege. Every day with you has been a gift." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the familiar warmth and solid strength of him. "We have built a good life, have we not?" "The best life," Owen agreed. "Better than I ever imagined possible." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to purple, the first stars beginning to appear. Inside the cabin, they could hear Thomas and Elizabeth helping clean up from dinner, could hear the grandchildren being put to bed in the various rooms. Their family, the legacy they had built together, continued on. "What do you think happens next?" Grace asked softly. "We are not getting any younger." "Next, we keep living," Owen said firmly. "We keep loving each other, keep watching our grandchildren grow, keep being grateful for every day we have together. And when our time comes, whenever that is, we will face it the same way we have faced everything else together." Grace smiled and squeezed his hand. "Together," she repeated. "I like the sound of that." As the darkness deepened and the stars multiplied overhead, Owen and Grace remained on the porch, hands linked, hearts intertwined. The mountain man who had once preferred solitude and the Boston girl who had lost her way had found each other against all odds, and their love had created something beautiful and lasting. The story could have ended differently. Grace could have died in that dusty sawmill, another anonymous victim of frontier hardship. Owen could have remained alone in his mountain cabin, never knowing what he was missing. But fate, or providence, or simple chance had brought them together at exactly the right moment. Owen had seen Grace faint from hunger, and he had made a choice that changed both their lives forever. He had fed her. He had sheltered her. He had loved her. And he had made sure she never starved again, not just for food, but for love, for security, for a place to belong. As they finally rose to go inside, Owen paused at the door and looked back at the mountains, dark silhouettes against the star-filled sky. This was home. This wild, beautiful, sometimes harsh land had given him everything that mattered: a purpose, a family, a love that had sustained him through all the years. "Thank you," he whispered to the mountains, to the universe, to whatever power had guided Grace to that sawmill on that particular day. Grace heard him and smiled, understanding. "Come to bed, my love," she said. "Tomorrow is another day." And there would be many more tomorrows, filled with the ordinary miracles of daily life, with the love of family and the satisfaction of work well done. There would be challenges, certainly, and sorrows too, for that was the nature of life. But there would also be joy and laughter, and the deep contentment that comes from building something lasting with your own two hands and the person you love most in the world. Owen and Grace Kincaid had done exactly that. From a chance meeting in a sawmill to a love that spanned decades, from a starving girl and a solitary mountain man to a thriving family legacy, They had created something remarkable. And as they climbed into bed that night, still reaching for each other after all these years, they knew that whatever time they had left, they would spend it the way they had spent every day since that fateful moment together, loving each other and grateful for the unexpected blessing that had changed everything. The mountain wind sighed through the pines, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and in the cabin nestled among the trees, a family slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved and safe. Owen's arm was wrapped around Grace, holding her close even in sleep, just as he had promised to do all those years ago when he had taken a frightened, starving girl into his home and his heart. He had saved her life that day, but she had saved his too, in ways he never could have predicted. Together, they had created not just a family, but a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone, passed down through generations of children who would tell the story of how their grandparents met, how a mountain man saw a woman faint from hunger at the mill, how he fed her and made sure she never starved again, and how that simple act of kindness blossomed into a love story for the ages. It was a good story, a true story, and it was theirs, the end of one day and the beginning of another, the cycle continuing as it always had, as it always would. In the mountains of Montana, where the air was clean and the stars were bright, and the pine trees stood sentinel over the land, the Kincaid family had put down roots that would last for generations. And it all started with one man's compassion, one woman's resilience, and the decision to reach out a helping hand when it was needed most. Owen Kincaid had been a solitary mountain man, content in his isolation, until the moment he saw Grace Whitmore collapse in that sawmill. In that instant, everything changed. He could not have known it then, could not have predicted the beautiful chaos that would follow the marriage, the children, the grandchildren, the full, rich life they would build together. All he knew was that someone needed help, and he had the means to provide it. That was all it took. One moment of compassion, one decision to help, and from that small seed an entire forest had grown. As the Montana night deepened and the cabin settled into sleep, the story of Owen and Grace continued, not in grand gestures or dramatic moments, but in the quiet, steady rhythm of a life well lived. In the morning, Owen would wake early and start the fire while Grace prepared breakfast. They would share coffee on the porch and discuss the day ahead. Maybe some of the grandchildren would visit, or maybe it would just be the two of them, enjoying the peaceful solitude they had once each craved for different reasons. Whatever the day brought, they would face it together, just as they had promised all those years ago when they stood in that little church in Butte and pledged their lives to each other. The mountain man and the girl he had saved from starvation, two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, exactly when they needed it most. Their love story was not one of grand passion and sweeping romance, though there had certainly been moments of both. It was something quieter and more enduring, a love built on mutual respect, on shared work and shared joy, on the simple commitment to care for each other through all the days of their lives. It was the kind of love that lasted, that weathered storms and celebrated triumphs, that grew deeper and stronger with each passing year, and it had all started with a meal. With Owen's decision to feed a starving woman and make sure she never went hungry again. That promise had extended far beyond physical nourishment. He had fed her soul with kindness, her heart with love, her spirit with security and belonging. And she had done the same for him, filling the empty spaces in his life with warmth and laughter and purpose. They had saved each other, these two unlikely souls who had found each other in the wild mountains of Montana Territory in the late summer of 1877. And in saving each other, They had created something beautiful that would outlast them both, a family, a legacy, a testament to the transformative power of compassion and love. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, painting the mountain peaks in shades of pink and gold, a new day began for the Kincaid family. Owen stirred first, as he always did, careful not to wake Grace as he slipped from the bed. He padded to the window and looked out at the familiar landscape, at the mountains he had called home for so many years, and felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. Grace joined him a moment later, slipping her hand into his, and together they watched the sun rise over the mountains, just as they had done thousands of times before and would do thousands of times more, God willing. "Good morning," Grace murmured, her voice still rough with sleep. "Good morning, my love," Owen replied, pulling her close. "Another beautiful day." "The most beautiful," Grace agreed, though she was not looking at the mountains. She was looking at Owen, at the man who had given her everything, who had loved her faithfully for more than 3 decades, who would love her until his last breath. And in that moment, as the sun climbed higher and the day truly began, Owen and Grace Kincaid stood together in the cabin they had built, surrounded by the evidence of their life together, and were perfectly, completely, absolutely content. They had found each other when both were lost in different ways. They had built a life from nothing but determination and love. They had raised children and weathered storms and celebrated joys. They had grown old together, their lives so intertwined that neither could imagine existence without the other. This was the happy ending they had earned, the reward for faith and perseverance, and the courage to take a chance on love when it appeared unexpectedly. This was what it meant to truly live, to truly love, to truly commit to another person and honor that commitment every single day. Owen kissed the top of Grace's head, breathing in the familiar scent of her, and silently thanked whatever force had brought her into his life. Grace leaned into his embrace, feeling safe and cherished and deeply, profoundly grateful for the man who had saved her life, and then spent every day since making that life worth living. Together, they turned from the window and began their day, moving through the familiar routine with the ease of long practice. Coffee was made, breakfast prepared, chores divided and conquered. It was ordinary, it was beautiful, it was theirs. And as the years continued to pass, as seasons changed and children grew and life marched on in its inevitable way, Owen and Grace Kincaid remained constant, 2 hearts beating as one, 2 lives completely intertwined, 2 souls that had recognized each other and refused to let go. The mountain man who had once lived in solitude had found his home in the arms of the woman he had saved. The Boston girl who had lost everything had found her place in the wild mountains with the man who had given her a second chance at life. Together, they had created something extraordinary from humble beginnings, proving that love can indeed conquer all when it is backed by commitment, compassion, and the simple determination to care for each other no matter what challenges arise. This was their story. This was their legacy. And as long as mountains stood tall and stars shone bright in the Montana sky, their love would endure, a testament to the power of one man's kindness and one woman's resilience, and the beautiful life they built together when 2 lonely souls found each other and decided to never let go.